Hey, how's it going? Today I interview retired Army doctor and Colonel Skip Mondragon. We talk about his storied history in the armed forces. We discuss his battle with depression, which led him to write a book, Wrestling Depression is Not for Wimps. And we also geek out a little bit. So I hope you enjoy the interview. Hey guys, it's Chris DT Gordon here with my new friend Skip Madragon. Oh, Skip. I was practicing my head. Maybe you can help me out with the pronunciation.
Mondragon.
Mondragon. Yes, as I said before we started recording, it's like you're a hero in a YA novel or a fantasy series. Skip Mondragon. And so, how are you doing today, Skip?
I am doing well, Chris. I am doing
Excellent.
very well.
And Skip and I have a couple things in common. Skip is a huge Marvel fan. And so, who is your favorite Marvel hero?
Spider-Man.
Spider-Man. And why is it Spider-Man?
Spider-Man didn't inherently have any powers. He was smart. And once he got bit by that radioactive spider and then had to develop, he had the spidey sense, of course, but then had to create that web. And it was that web that gave him his powers other than his spidey sense. So I was very small for my age. I was bullied as a kid. And I identified with Spider-Man. So I could identify with Peter Parker, the skinny kid that was smart, but used that abilities that he gained to help others, to fight the bad guys. And that's something I always wanted to do because I was so small and so skinny and always picked on. And then I found that avenue through wrestling in a roundabout way.
Okay, yeah, I find that when we're able to connect with our heroes, they bring so much more meaning to our lives, and so that's fantastic that we share that geeky connection, and we also share a connection in that we both have scars. And so you had shared a story with me from your childhood. Can you please maybe elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. When I was young, I was maybe 16 months old or thereabouts. I was in my high chair and I was throwing peas at my two older sisters. We're at my grandma's house and they had an old potbelly stove and another something that was hot. And I was throwing peas at them. I stood up in my high chair and I slipped and my head got lodged between these two hot things, and the
Oh no.
potbelly stove and the other were, raging with heat. So my head got lodged and I got burned.
Mm.
And of course, I was taken to the hospital. They wrapped my face. And then my mother says that the day I was supposed to get my bandages off, I was running, tripped, and when they took the bandages off, they saw that things had bubbled up and it was attributed to that fall. So I didn't get the healing that they had hoped for. And so I have scars most prominently across here and here on the right cheek, some on the left cheek, and across my nose. So people would ask over the years, gee, what happened to you? And I'd tell them, well, I got burned as a child. And some I'll go into more details if they're closer friends or they press for the answer. So it's something I lived with all my life.
Okay. All right. And how has it affected your character? Having those scars, especially when they're so prominent on your face.
I don't know that it's affecting my character, but I guess I've never been asked that question, Chris. So that's an interesting question. I think it's probably reflective, perhaps, of the internal scars, the scars you can't see, and how we live with those scars, and that those scars make us who we are, and how we deal with those scars to become the person we are, and how do we overcome that? So it's part of our journey that shape us, and how do we overcome those unseen scars? Oh boy. Oh.
Oh, now I fell on my face.
Hold on.
No worries. For those who
Yeah.
are following
So,
us on the
hold on.
podcast,
My screen.
yeah, your screen fell. Yeah,
Right.
so
So I got too excited there.
it happens. I like that. Put a feather in my cap that I like to get my guests involved in their stories, and so I think we're all good. So I'll let you get settled here.
There we go.
Awesome. All right. Well, you're talking about your journey, and you've had quite a journey. Reading up on you, you are a 26-year Army veteran, and first I want to say thank you for your service.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate that. You're an amateur wrestling aficionado, a Toastmaster, a internal medicine physician for over 30 years, a writer and speaker, teacher, preacher, coach, and a national veterans wrestling champion. You've lived quite the journey so far. And
Yes,
so,
sir.
and so I know that you've written a book based on a lot of those internal struggles. It's called Wrestling Depression is Not for Wimps. Can you maybe go into a little bit of what inspired you to write the book, and maybe talk a little bit about the book itself? And there it is, folks.
Here's my book. This book was born out of my experience in my last 16 months in the Army, 18 months.
Really quick, I just want to tell the podcast audience that he was showing you the book. And so if you're watching on YouTube, obviously you saw the book, but it's called Wrestling Depression is Not for Wimps. But anyways, I'm sorry, Skip, go ahead.
That starting in June of 2013, I began to experience insomnia that became progressively worse. I was preparing to retire from the Army in 2014, and so anxiety started to ramp up and concerns about that. Likewise, there were some things going on in my department. I was stationed at Eisenhower Army Medical Center. I was the chief of the department there, and there were some difficulties that happened with our dialysis unit and our cath lab, our cardiac catheterization lab, things that I could not have done anything about, but I took on the responsibility. But it affected our graduate medical education, so teaching for our residents and medical students, and also affected patient care. And I took that on personally and began to ruminate on that. Oh, this is horrible. What could have I done? What should have I done? How could we prevented this? This is going to impact their training. Means that residents aren't going to be able to rotate with us. We're going to have to send our residents elsewhere to get this training. On and on it went. We're going to have to deny patients that need this care and send them out, so on and so forth. And so I began to ruminate on this. And then starting in September, I had the first of 3 surgeries that would take place in over 6 months. The first was a graft from my hard pellet to my lower gums, where there was some receding gums. Now, these surgeries were because I had put things off, not taking care of myself, saying, okay, I'll get it done. I need to get it done. But put it off. And then it's crunch time. I'm going to retire here in 18 months. I need to get these things done. So I had that first surgery in September, that graft. Everything was going along great until the first time I started spurting blood in my mouth. And you just get this rush of hot red blood. And I'd be putting my thumb up there, try to stanch the blood, stop it, spitting blood, and holding this would last 20, 30 minutes.
Oh, wow.
I'd call my oral surgeon, explain it. He'd say, come on in, and they would do something here to it. And of course, this didn't happen typically during regular duty hours. It was late at night or early morning before the clinic was open. And I wasn't about going to the ER because I knew they weren't going to do anything for me. They were just going to say, call your oral surgeon during duty hours. It's like, okay, I'm not going to do this. But that happened that happened, I think, 3 times. Finally, on the 4th time, they brought me in and said, okay, enough of this. And they just cauterized the area, and that stopped. But with that surgery, it disrupted my exercise patterns. It disrupted my diet. It disrupted my sleep. And so it just compounded this. The next surgery was a knee surgery. And so all of that was disrupted. The ruminations got worse. So we talk about negative ruminations or ruminations with depression. And those ruminations are like a cow ruminating. You know, a cow has those different stomachs, and so they ruminate. They chew it, it comes up, and they chew it, it comes up. And that's what rumination is like. It's like this endless loop of negative thoughts that play over and over in your mind. So the insomnia is getting worse. The thoughts are getting worse. My mood is getting worse. My physical schedule is getting all out of whack. I came to understand that I deal with anxiety by intense exercise. That has been one of my equilibrators. Was very, very intense exercise. And if I didn't get that, I felt like I didn't exercise and I was more on edge.
I think a lot of us, I'm sorry, I was just going to interject and say, I think a lot of us can connect with that. You know, if we don't get that physical, the exercise and get that energy out, that it definitely affects our mood.
Right. And so the sleep is getting worse. The mood is getting worse. My diet was disrupted with this oral surgery when you can't eat your vegetables, your nuts, the things that, are mainstays of your healthy diet. That's affected. And then the knee surgery was the next one in September, or rather December. Everything's going along great. And then post-operatively, I start getting this horrendous pain, the worst I've ever experienced in my life, shooting pain up into my thigh that every turn in bed, every time I move, it just sends this horrible, burning, electric-like pain up my leg. I just couldn't sleep. I couldn't concentrate more than a few minutes. I'm laying on the bed, trying to watch Netflix, trying to read, trying to pray, trying to meditate, trying to do anything to distract myself. Taking the medication, my surgeon, finally I called him. John Bojesko was his name, great guy. And I called him. He was at a conference in Colorado. Called me back after a session and said, "What's going on, Skip?" And I said, "John, I think I have regional pain syndrome. This pain is just horrendous. I can't." But previous to that, I think it was the night before that, I had gone to the ER thinking maybe this is a deep venous thrombosis, a blood clot in my thigh. So it's torture getting out to the car, getting in the car, getting into the ER. They did a ultrasound, determined no, there's not a clot. The doctor said, well, maybe you've just been exercising it too much. The range of motion exercise gave me some muscle relaxant, didn't do a thing. And so I called John the next day and he said, I'm gonna put you in touch with the physiatrist, the physical medicine rehabilitation doc. So we do that, but it's after hours. So I called her about 4:15, and she says, well, are you at the hospital? I said, no, I'm at home. She said, okay, I'll see you first thing in the morning. I go to see her. She says, yeah, I agree, but we're going to treat this very aggressively. She did. And about 24 hours later, I felt that medicine take effect and that pain started going down significantly. I realized, there was this low level nausea that had come with this and this headache, and everything started alleviating. And I later told her, Mary Ellen, if you had been sitting next to me, I would have given you a big kiss, because first time in over a week that I felt comfortable. So I was
Wow.
recovering from that, and that took several weeks to recover
Mm.
from. Again, further disrupted my routine, my sleep, my mood, um, the whole activity. So it's all getting worse as
Mm.
this is going on. And then the last of my surgeries took place in March, and that was skin revision, laser skin scar revision.
Okay.
And then I had a complication with that because I got an infection, and my dermatologist put me on an antibiotic, and it gave me one dose, and it gave me a neuropathic reaction where I laid there in bed and my fingers were going numb, my hands in my toes, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is horrible. And
Mhm.
so I called her the next day and said, don't take any more. I mean, took the one dose and I wasn't going to take any more,
Yeah.
but I continued to have problems with that for several months. I mean, almost 18 months after that one dose. But all of those things, again, compounded, disruptions, worsening and worsening mood, isolated, um, disengaged,
Mhm.
didn't want to go out. The mood just spiraled down and down and down. Those ruminations became worse and worse. Got to the point with the insomnia that I would have welcomed 2 hours of sleep, and some nights even an hour of sound sleep, because there were some nights I didn't feel like I slept whatsoever. I'd just be up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, trying to go to sleep, couldn't go to sleep, get up. When I got sleepy, go back to bed, and then my mind's racing and can't get back to sleep. After 20 minutes, get up, and this would play out almost all night long,
Mm.
and drag through the day, and repeat the process, and then nighttime comes on, and you're dreading nighttime. You're thinking, "Oh, I'm so tired." But
Here we go again.
now I'm worried that I'm not going to fall asleep. And then if you do fall asleep in a couple hours, bing, I
Mhm.
was wide awake and typically couldn't fall back asleep.
Mm.
So this is going on, the mood, the isolation, my confidence is in the toilet, indecisive. Um, my cognition was off. I couldn't remember what I read 5 minutes earlier. I was having trouble remembering names, drugs, medications that I used, medical terms, conversations. Uh, I thought I had early onset dementia. It was
And this is
horrible.
and this is all while you were still in active duty, correct?
Right, right. So this is started in June of 2013, rolled over into 2014, and finally in April of 2014, I went to work that day and I was at rock bottom. I locked my office door, and I had this beautiful corner office, primo office, probably other than the commander's office, probably the best office in all the hospital. Two giant bay windows that were like walls there. I closed all the blinds. I turned off the light. I locked the door. I turned off my pager or my phone and the office phone. I crawled up in a fetal position under my desk. And
Mm.
for 4 hours, I was asking myself, Skip, what are you doing? How did you get here? And I kept asking that question. And slowly, I began to put the pieces together over 4 hours. Finally, admitted to myself, Skip, you're depressed. Go get some help. So April 17th, 2014, I went, got help. And that started my recovery, which is slow and halting, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 1 step forward, 2 back.
Mhm.
So initially, I saw a clinical psychologist, and then I was seeing my clinical psychologist weekly, saw my primary care physician. She did a thorough evaluation to make sure my depression wasn't associated with some other medical cause. determined it wasn't recommended medication. I remember her asking me, well, I think you should be on medicine. What do you think? And I said, yes, I agree. Started medication. I was seeing my therapist weekly at that time. Started the medication and eventually started seeing a psychiatrist. And so that was the case through the rest of my time on active duty. As I got better, I wasn't seeing my therapist as often. So I progressively got better during that time, but there'd be ebbs and flows with that. I was praying during this whole period of time and even early into my recovery, Lord, 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 please, please deliver me from this darkness. I felt like my prayers just bounced off the ceiling.
Mm.
And I was just miserable. I felt like I was in this deep, dark pit with a tunnel there. You could see a little speck of light way, way, way down there. And I felt my head was in this fog and I was slogging through a foot of mud. That's how I felt.
Okay.
And my brother, Chris, my youngest brother, called me one day, very excited. I was about 6 weeks or so into my recovery. And he said, Skip, I was at a Bible study with Franklin Graham, and he talked about suffering, especially Christ suffering on our behalf. So why, as Western Christians, should we think we are immune to suffering and shouldn't have to suffer? And I took that to heart, and it reminded me of a verse from Philippians that says, oh, that I might know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings. Now, I had prayed that verse thousands of times over the course of my walk with Christ from the time I was 17 years old. But when I was suffering, I was just asking God, please, please, please deliver me from this darkness. And over the next few days, my prayers changed to, Lord, what would you have me learn? And how can I use it to help others? And that was an epiphany. That changed my whole perspective. So I began to note what I was learning, what I had learned up to that point, with the intention at some point I was going to share this with others.
Was that the point where you decided to use this experience to help others that you turned that corner, correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
I decided that I was not going to let this pain and suffering go to waste, if you will, that I was going to allow what I was going through. I was going to say, God, if I have to endure this, so be it, but allow me to use it to help others. And so that was like you say, a shift. It was an epiphany. My eyes were opened, my heart was opened, and I determined, okay, I've suffered horribly, and if I have to continue to suffer, I can accept that. I can walk through this darkness because I know you are with me, and this can help others. And so I did begin to note those lessons learned, if you will, with the intent, I'm going to share this. Before I left the Army, so I went on terminal leave in November, but before, not, we don't call it terminal leave anymore. Transitional leave is what they call it now.
Yeah.
However, before we did that, before my wife and I left, in October, I was given the opportunity. I'd asked our hospital commander if I could share with the hospital staff what I'd learned. And he graciously arranged for me to share with the hospital staff in our auditorium a morning session and an afternoon session, gave me an hour each time. So I shared my story and lessons learned with the intent that I'm a colonel, I'm a physician, I've been deployed 4 times, 30 months in combat zones. I'm a wrestler, I'm a national champ, I'm a tough guy, but I succumbed. I became a casualty of depression. So don't walk in denial. If you are struggling, go get help. Help is readily available. You don't have to suffer in silence any longer. Don't worry about stigma. You're not going to be seen as weak, a wimp. Go get help. So I shared my message with recommendations, not just that, but things I learned along the way that could help them recover. I made 3 public service announcements. Initially, I'd asked the commander, well, can I do things, share some things on our closed circuit TV about this, some short messages? He said, Skip, I think we can do better than that. Let's have our public affairs officer touch base with the Department of Army Public Affairs. In a few weeks, the Department of Army Public Affairs, they had some folks with TV cameras there in my office. And we were making 3 PSAs, public service announcements for the Army. Suicide prevention, mental illness, if you will, or struggling as a soldier. In particular, it could be DA civilians, also Department of the Army civilians, but geared at soldiers primarily. If you are struggling, I'm Dr. Skip Mondragon. Colonel Mondragon. I'm Dr. Skip Mondragon. I'm Colonel Mondragon. I'm a physician. So on and so forth. And recommending if you are struggling, I was depressed, etc., go get help. So when I share, I'm very raw, Chris. I'm very open with my story. I get down into the down and dirty because I've been there, and I know that men in particular aren't willing, well, they're far less willing to admit, I'm struggling, I need help, and less willing to go get that help. And meanwhile, they're...
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
And so it's the women in their life that are usually saying, please go get help. Please, you need help. And it's the men saying, oh, I can do this on my own. I don't need any help. I'm all right. They're irritable. They can be angry. They're withdrawn, and they're snapping at their family, and their family can be walking around. Families are walking around on eggshells saying, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help them. And they start avoiding them and wondering, what do we do? And it gets worse. So not only does the man suffer, but their family suffers, their loved ones suffer, and they're in a quandary. How do we help them?
So when someone started coming, people start coming up to you after these PSAs, when was it when you decided, okay, I can do, I need to take a step forward here from these PSAs?
Well, actually, PSAs was it before or after I shared? I think that might have been after I shared with the hospital staff. I can't remember exactly now. They were close, at least within a few weeks. I think the PSAs may have come afterwards, if memory serves me right, Chris. But people came up after I shared in person, and a lot of individuals came forward and said, I've had the same struggles, Dr. Mondragon. I've had the same troubles, Colonel Mondragon. I've been there. And they shared their own journey, or I'm struggling too. So a lot of people admit when somebody that is, if you will, has a strong platform or in authority, if you will, if I can use that term, authority, a colonel, chief of their department, a doctor, well-known in the hospital, involved in a lot of things in the hospital, when you can stand up there and say, I've been depressed, I'm being treated for this, I take medication, I see a psychologist. I am being treated by a psychiatrist. When you can stand up there and share those things, then you have their attention.
Leaders lead, don't they?
Indeed.
Yes. And so, what was the timeline between you giving those PSAs and the book?
The PSAs would have been in October of 2014. The book, now that's an interesting story. I was watching a webinar, it was a week-long webinar with a lady who was in charge of the webinar, Christine Closer from Transformational Books. Lovely, lovely lady. I don't know how I heard about this. Something came up in an email message. It piqued my interest. I thought, oh, book? Wow. And so I had a myriad of guests on, and it ran pretty much 9 to 5 for a week. And I was not working at the time. I had retired from the Army. So our last day in the Army officially was December 31st, 2014. At that point, we were in Texas. And this was taking place May, I believe it was May of 2015. I was still working on getting my Texas state medical license, so I wasn't working at the time. So I attended most of these sessions. I have 2 full notebooks with all my notes. And at the end, she's talking about this transformational author contest. And there were some questions you had to answer. What is your transformational story? How would your transformational story affect others? How would it affect your business? How would it affect your world? Or rather, how would it transform your business? How would it transform others? How would it transform your business? And how would it transform the world? So how were you transformed, and how the transformation on others? And then you had this very limited amount of space you had to write in, very limited text. So you had to describe it, share it succinctly. And I thought, this sounds really interesting. Now, the winner of this had a book deal. I thought, wow, that would be cool. And I thought, if I win, that would be awesome. If I don't win, this will be a good exercise going through having to do this exercise to think through all these steps concisely and clearly. So I worked on that. I labored on that, and I submitted it in early July. Well,
So
I
how
get
long?
this.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, ask your question, please.
I was going to say, how long did it take you to craft the book from, hearing about the contest to submitting it?
Bear with me, Chris. Hit
No
my
worries.
cord here.
Yeah.
So, how long did it take me to craft the book? Well,
Yes.
I won the contest. I was notified of the contest in August of 2015. I did not start to work on the book till December, barely. Really doing something about it in January of 2016. And then slowly evolving it. And then September of last year, I got a proof copy. And then in March of this year, the book was published. So that was the process.
Okay. All right. So roughly 4 years from winning the contest to starting to assemble your ideas, organize your thoughts, and getting it into print to where now, March 2020, you have a physical copy of the book.
Yes.
Excellent. And the title again is Wrestling Depression is Not for Wimps. If you were to give a 2 or 3 minute elevator pitch to have someone read it, how would you sell that the book to them?
This book is written for men. Are you beat down, beat up, and on your back, fighting to get up? Do you need a hand up? It's written succinctly in short, easy to digest chapters. It's written in layman's terms. It's written to it's written to address what depression is and how you can use this with practical tips, tactics, and techniques to get better. I wrote it with 3 primary aims: decrease stigma related to mental illness, encourage men to go get help if they're struggling, and then offer them those practical tips.
Excellent, excellent. I think that's a really good elevator pitch there, Skip. So where can someone find this book if they wanted to purchase it?
They can go to Amazon, and they could either look it up under my name, Skip Mondragon, M-O-N, Dragon, Skip Mondragon, or they can look for it under the title, Wrestling Depression is Not for Wimps.
Excellent. And where could people contact you? What are your social media channels?
Twitter at Skip WNW. Wrestling is Not for Wimps. That's what the WNW stands for. If you can see that.
All right, yep. He's showing us his card for those in the podcast there. Wrestling is Not for Whips.
So Twitter and Facebook at Skip WNW. The other is my website, www.wrestlingisnotforwimps.com.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much, Skip. And my one last question, all my listeners want to know, what is your favorite dinosaur?
Oh, a Tyrannosaurus Rex.
And why is T-Rex your favorite?
Oh, he's mighty. He's powerful. He's feared by all the others. Something that I wanted to always do. Be
Excellent.
Feared by others. Big, powerful, of course. I'm not big and powerful, but I will tell you, when I started wrestling, I wasn't any bigger. I was typically always the smallest kid in my class. I wrestled at the lightest weight class in typically, and then in high school, the 3rd lightest, but bullies left me alone when I started wrestling. I used to think, dang it, and I laughed with my brothers as we got older. Where were the bullies then? Bring them on.
So I guess one lesson we could take away is don't let your size rule you. You rule your size.
I think you could say that. Yeah. I think that's a good way there. That you don't. I have another book that's been churning in me, and it will come out, and it will be entitled "Wrestling Bullies is Not for Wimps." And you can be on the outlook for that because it will be coming out in the future.
Excellent. Well, we definitely will be, Skip. So Skip Mondragon. There, I said it correctly.
Go!
Yes. You got to find success wherever you can. Well, thank you very much, Skip. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I look forward to your further success, and I wish you, sir, the best of days.
Thank you, Chris. Likewise, it's been my pleasure.
Thank you. All right, we'll talk with you later.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my interview with Skip. I certainly did. If you want to get a hold of his book, Wrestling Depression is Not for Wimps, you can find it on Amazon in both a Kindle form and the paperback version. If you want to reach out to me, you can check me out at www.chrisdtgordon.com. You can also check out my YouTube channel, obviously, as well as my Instagram account at ChrisDTGordon. And you can always check out the podcast, Scar Bearers. You can find it on the Apple Podcast app. Well, I thank you for joining me today. Please have a great day, and remember to pass on perfection and go for greatness.